Brown says, get that India. Big boy.
Call an ambulance! Maybe call a police! Oh, what a shot! What a shot! Campbell Killer!
Hello, and I don't know what to badge this one, boys. Is it an instant reaction? Is it an emergency podcast? It is something outside the bounds or confines of normal football podcasting, but either way, whatever it is, I'm your host, John, and some people call me 4020 when it comes to football. And before I introduce my co-host for this week's emergency instant reaction, whatever it is, podcast, I suppose I'll set the table for this quote, boys, where Brad Arthur has taken the magnanimous route and delivered a almost romantic way to sign off on his time as a Parramatta Eel. Via his manager, Chris Orr, who spoke to the Sydney Morning Herald, he relayed this quote from Brad. He said to me, being Chris Orr, "Had you told me I would coach 264 games for Parramatta, reach a grand final and watch my son debut, then get sacked, I'd do it all again. I'd sign up for it all again tomorrow." It's poignant stuff, boys. Sixties, Clint. It's a very somber podcast. We come here convening on a Monday night following news that the Eels have sacked their head coach, Brad Arthur, effective immediately after those 264 games, sporting a tick under a 52% win rate as a Parramatta head coach, the longest tenured head coach in the blue and gold. Emotions are obviously running high across the NRL. There's been a fascinating spread of reactions from neutrals, from blue and gold faithful, some people reveling in the movement of the head coach, some people scratching heads in the neutral space. There's obviously a lot to this, a lot to unravel about the decision, about where the Eels go to from here. But I'll get your initial thoughts, I suppose, going into it. We'll just jump right into it, boys. 60s, Clint. I don't know which one of you want to lead off here, but yeah, let's start talking about where the Parramatta Eels go to now that they've moved on from Brad Arthur.
John, first of all, let me just respond to that quote from BA. It's a classy quote and one that doesn't surprise me at all, because anyone who's had anything to do with Brad would know that would be the response that he was always going to give, because he'd been a Parramatta man for his life. His family were Parramatta to the core, and it doesn't surprise that he would respond in that way. As I said, that was classy. I would have liked the Eels response, the Eels announcement, to have been a bit better than what it was. It to me, it was worded quite abruptly, and I'm a bit disappointed with it. I am disappointed. I'm not a bit disappointed. I am disappointed with that. I can try and tippy-toe around it, but I'm not. I think all of us knew that despite any suggestions to the contrary, that this was going to it's since been revealed that the Eels have been in negotiations with Wayne Bennett since the 1st of May. Brad Arthur has been saying that he has the support of the board. Now, we know that the history of that statement and how much it means in
absolutely
rugby league.
Undefeated when it comes to the contrary, doesn't it?
Yeah. And for me, probably the most disappointing thing in this whole episode has been that we have had to go through those sorts of statements with regard to our club. And my honest thought was going to be that the club would make a call on this at the end of this year. Brad was contracted till the end of next year. I fully expected that the club would make a call on that at the end of the year. I have even said to people that I expect a call to be made at the end of the year. I even said to people, I'm proud of the fact that our club doesn't react by doing mid-season sackings. And and here we are right now. So, Clint, I'm just going to throw it to you because I think it's important that we all have our say, and we also are logical in what we have to say in what is probably an emotional response that we are all feeling at the moment, because all of us are lifetime Eels supporters, and ultimately it's not going to matter who coaches the club, that we're not people who go and boycott the club or refuse to support the club because of decisions that are made or how the team's performing. But it is also important for us to give our honest opinions on what's transpired today.
Well, Sixties, it's a poignant moment, isn't it? That's probably the best choice of word that I can use right now. And the pragmatist in me will do his best to answer your question there. And it's definitely some mixed feelings with this one. Brad saw us through a lot of challenges. We'll probably even touch on some of those a little bit later as we reflect across his tenure. But there's a lot of thanks from my perspective from him. I honestly don't think we could have been better led by a coach through the debacle that was 2016. And that was a real, that had the potential to be a really, really, well, it was a big turning point in our club's at least more recent history, but it could have been a turning point for the worse. And, the stability of the head coach and how he rallied the players who spent most of that season playing for nothing when we had to shed about a third of our roster to get under the salary cap. And may I remind people, for transgressions of previous
sins of the
staff
father.
there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly right. The sins of the father. And then to turn around and bring the team back around to a top four, finish the year following. It was definitely a reflection of the strength of Brad's character, and why that quote and comment that 40 opened with is of no surprise, because in the depths of his soul, he is a Parramatta man, and we've been very lucky to have him steer the ship.
Yeah, I just want to echo that as well, because I mean, we've all like even Brad's harshest critics have acknowledged the work, the way that he led the team, the club, through some difficult times. I don't believe that we would have come out of those sort of dark days without having someone like Brad in charge. It would not have been possible. I don't agree with the decision that's been made today, and I have no problem in saying that. As I said, it doesn't mean I'm not going to support whoever comes in following Brad, but I would ask the question, what changes from here? So only the club can answer that, because the removal of a head coach is a fast action that is, I guess it gives a very public response to the pressure that was no doubt being applied via media, via groups of fans, who knows, possibly by sponsors. We don't know what the case would have been. No doubt, we know that there was plenty of supporters who were making threats about not renewing memberships and that sort of thing. So no doubt there was pressure that was being applied. If you know the history of rugby league, and you don't have to be a great fan to know what happens in rugby league clubs when these sorts of times are being experienced. As I said, however, I don't agree with the decision as such. I think there are other things that need to be fixed up of probably of a much higher priority, which I'm not going to get into in this particular podcast. But the decision's been made. We've got, as supporters, we have no control over decisions that are made. But I guess we can reflect right now on what Brad has done for this club, and some of the talk that's going around now in the media about what's going to happen from here. But just to get back to where we've come from, those days that you just mentioned, the salary cap drama days, I thought that was, well, it was a very, very low point in the history of the club, a very, very low point in the history of the club. And we were fortunate that we had someone who could lead us out of those times. And he was left to do press conferences at a time when there basically wasn't the leadership in the club, because that leadership had been removed from the club. And it was the way that he protected the players and kept the team focused even after the competition points were taken away was quite extraordinary. We got to a grand final in 2022, and obviously we know what happened last year. This year, well, we've seen a couple of matches that I think we've all been pretty straightforward in what we've thought about the performances that have happened in those games. I would imagine it is now a time for some key players to be reflecting on their form and what's happened. And we'll see how they respond this week. But you have to wonder what's been happening with the form of particular players this year. It's just been very, very disappointing. John?
Oh, yeah, no doubt. A coach like Arthur doesn't get sacked in the manner that happened today without responsibility going across the park. And like you said, especially in the playing group, we've highlighted several players this year who we felt have chronically underperformed, even with the coach extending a degree of loyalty that they should not have been afforded. And maybe that was perhaps Brad's downfall in that regard too. Although, again, the messaging out of the media has been confusing. This was a court decision that was made essentially a month ago, but it wasn't made official until today. It was then made official by us admitting that we've been courting Wayne Bennett and been rejected. So again, we can talk about that later. It's a little bit of a head scratcher. But yeah, within the playing group, there are absolutely some players that have contributed heavily to this. And again, they were extended significant reprieve by that coach. So it's unfortunate, but it's the ruthless nature of the business. In terms of the positive things to say about Brad, I mean, there's plenty. The mess that he took over when he came in on the tail end of 2013, and years of chronic mismanagement under Kearney and Stewart, and not just them, but off the field too. To make us instantly competitive in 2014, I think we missed the finals on for and against. To then have that dovetail into the sins of the father that you mentioned, Quint, a salary cap scandal that tore apart the competitive roster that we'd built in 2016, and to then go from there to nearly upsetting the Melbourne Storm in 2017, having a wooden spoon, and then spending 4 years entrenched inside the top 8, which is an insane record that he can proudly boast about, right up until that grand final, where unfortunately we just ran into a freight train of the modern era, where in almost any other any other era of rugby league, you would have given us a fair chance of winning a title in any one of those 4 years from 19 to 22, sorry. But it just happened to coincide with a dynasty in the Penrith Panthers. So if things played out even fractionally different recruitment, different, retentions, different developments, we still could have won a premiership in that window. And unfortunately we didn't. And, maybe Brad goes elsewhere and gets that one off his back, and it would be the most Parramatta thing ever for him to go elsewhere and win a title. But yeah,
John, I expect that Brad will get a gig elsewhere. I don't think there'll be any dramas about that. He's had contract offers over the years to go to other clubs, so it's not going to be any surprise that he will get a gig elsewhere. And when that happens, that's just going to be the nature of the beast, that he'll get a job elsewhere. And given how he is as a coach, I'll expect that he will have success wherever he goes as a coach, because he's the sort of coach that he doesn't make selections for any other reason other than that he feels that it's the best selection for a particular round, for a particular opponent. We've had times where we've disagreed with who he's selected in the team, and most recently, of course, there's been a couple of players that we feel should have been held accountable. Now, the easiest thing for Brad to do under these circumstances would have been to have bowed to public opinion and to have made the changes, but he wasn't making changes that he felt would not have been beneficial, as much as we might have felt that he was being too loyal to certain players. I don't think there was anything about loyalty in those calls. I think it was all about making what he felt was the best possible team selection to get the win. And of course, it may well have turned out to be Brad's downfall in terms of how some players were responding. But we also have to ask whether the players, as they are now, the age they are now, etc., whether they are capable of performing any better than what they are. And I guess we're soon going to see, aren't we? So anyone that's an Eels supporter who's been thinking, well, where are these players at? I guess we're going to get an answer soon enough as to whether they are ready to step up and improve how they perform. Clint?
Yeah, well, I mean, we're going to get that answer, because the fact of the matter is, for a lot of them now, and given the way our form line has been the last 18 games, and was it 5 wins from the last 18, 19 outings, something to that effect. For many of them, they're probably playing for their future. We've been critical of some players in our news podcast when going through the team list for the better part of the last month to 6 weeks, and that's recorded, because this might shock some people. We don't actually record all the opinions that we have on our shows. So off air, we've been even more critical and calling for some changes. And I'm not going to repeat names here, but there's a handful of guys there that are absolutely playing for their not just potentially Parramatta future, but maybe their rugby league futures.
Yeah, and John, the other interesting thing about all of this, and it's been discussed in the media as well, is the revelation that the Eels have been in negotiations with Wayne Bennett since the start of May, that they continued those negotiations in secret over Magic Round, and even after Bennett had announced that he was going to sign with South Sydney, and the Eels have publicly said that they tried, but Bennett said no. And
There's got to be
mean,
more to it than that. That is an insane PR move to put out there that you sandbagged your current coach and went for. Look, I don't like if you're going to move on from Brad Arthur, going for Wayne Bennett is the right move. Don't get me wrong. It's not like I'm being critical of the club in that regard. But why would you come out and say that he's rejected you? Like, I don't know. I don't pass that. So, I mean, NRL 360 having a ball this evening with Tallis and Graham and Nasta sort of spearheading a discussion that the Eels going to, throw a 11th hour bid at Wayne Bennett, whether it's successful or not. Maybe that's the case. Maybe that's why we open up that channel of conversation, because otherwise I don't know why you would so openly admit that you'd failed. It just seems odd.
Well, there was also the speculation in that same discussion that it had been done to save face with supporters, to say, now look, just so you know, we had a red hot crack at this bloke. I think as a supporter, it's more of a concern for me that you've had a red hot crack at a particular coach, and he's chosen to reject you. And I guess the Eels, when they're thinking, what are we going to do? Because in terms of how we handle things in the media, because don't misunderstand this in any way. Be very, very clear about this. Clubs have to work out what they will say publicly. It's just a life fact about rugby league clubs. The Eels are no different to any other club. They work out how they will put statements out there to the media about what's been going on. It's how football works. So that wouldn't be a throwaway line. There would be a reason behind it, whatever that reason is. So, but as you say, John, from our perspective, I mean, there's probably going to be plenty of comments in response to this podcast, whether people listen to the full podcast, part of the podcast, whatever the case may be. People might want to jump on and offer their opinions without even listening to this podcast. But people will have an opinion about that. So I'm expecting that there are going to be opinions. I'm interested in reading how people feel about the club making that statement. I mean, who knows? We might, in 24 hours, be talking about the fact that, what a big 11th hour push it was to get Wayne Bennett as a coach. Maybe they'll be feeling pleased about it. I don't know. But for me, right now, I don't agree with putting out a statement like that. If you've missed your target,
and you've had a month to prepare for the statement too.
Yeah. Clint, what do you want to say?
It's not good PR. I don't know if there's he's had a bit of a moment there in divulging that information, and it's been a bit of a slip of the tongue. But I don't personally understand what's been gained in doing that, unless this is some elaborate 4D chess move that we're all in the dark about, and we can't put the pieces together. I personally just don't understand why you bother sharing that information, other than to try and create, as you alluded to, Sixties, a sense of positive PR, which in my mind kind of backfires because people can see through it.
Yeah. John?
Yeah, I mean, I can only hope that it's 4D chess, like you're pointing out there, Quint, because otherwise reality is it's either essentially a parlay towards fans to say, yeah, look, we tried, and you're going to have to settle for, some plan B, plan C, or we just didn't really have a plan A in the first place and we just sacked the coach. It doesn't pass well on either front. So, and like I said, you move on. We've spoken about in the past about the reality where you move on from Brad Arthur as a hypothetical, And I've always maintained that if you're going to move on from Arthur, and it was interesting, it was not interesting, it was in a way a reinforcement of what we talked about, that on the 360 panel, you saw almost unanimously from former players, Anasta, Graham and Towers, that they all said Arthur was a great coach, and if you didn't move on from him for Wayne Bennett, then what are you doing? Like, you need to be an upgrade. And the reality is, if it's not Wayne Bennett now, then at the very least it's a side grade, and realistically it's probably going to be a rookie with, that's unproven, inheriting a squad with some pretty big deficiencies. So it's going to mean it wouldn't be Parramatta if it wasn't a wild ride. So that's where we're at. Is it going to be an 11th-hour bid for Wayne Bennett? Is it going to be a rookie coach? Is it going to be a reclamation project from a failed coach elsewhere? I don't know. Now we just roll the dice.
Let's talk about some of the names that they were throwing in there. So if they're talking about a sideways move as a coach, they talked about Michael Maguire. They talked about Holbrook. Was there any other name that was mentioned as a sideways move? In
the printed press, there's been a few more options. On 360, I think they were the most of the names mentioned, but the general contenders seem to be, in terms of rookies, Jason.
Well, before we get to rookies, was there any other sideways ones? Because rookies, you're now talking about a punt.
Oh yeah, in terms of sideways moves, I think the two were mostly mentioned were the ones you spoke about there, and Maguire and Holbrook, who, frankly, given what we saw on the Gold Coast, it would be an insane signing. I suppose the other one that hasn't been mentioned in the media, surprisingly, is a former Eel that did a pretty good job at Cronulla before getting flicked there in John Morris. John Morris. So they're probably the three NRL seasoned options. And then beyond that, it starts getting into some pretty speculative territory, yeah.
Yeah, so the rookies that have been speculated are Jason Riles, Blake Green, Josh Hannay.
Intercode, Michael Chaker.
Okay.
Yeah. Michael Ennis. These are names I've seen in printed press. So the media is going to have a lot of fun with this one. I can tell you that.
Yeah. So this is about to be some sort of wild ride, is all I can suggest. I mean, well, can we suggest as well, are they going to track how Trent Barrett goes as the interim coach? Or do they just rule him out and say, no, he's just going to be the interim coach and that's it? I mean, it is what's the conversation with Baz going to be? What are they saying to him?
I mean,
what did they say? What did they say to Brad?
Historically, being an interim NRL coach doesn't bode well for your future at a given club, does it?
It doesn't seem to, no.
And I think Trent has done some good things with the attack when the roster's been available, fully available. I think we stored a little bit more recently. But if we had aspirations of greatness, then I don't think you'd be going from Brad Arthur to Trent Barrett as a head coach. And again, this is what is so frustrating is if you're moving on from Brad Arthur, you would have hoped there would have been a firm plan of succession in place, that you would have had Wayne Bennett secured before making the move, that you would have had whatever, hot shot rookie coach was the guy secured. And now we're left scrambling in a void with, like I said, the media having a field day about this. They're going to feast on this for weeks. So I don't know. It's a very awkward spot for the club right now. And maybe Wayne Bennett secretly is the guy. Maybe they're going to get the job done. And if that's the case, I will salute the club, because that, in terms of what's available, is probably the only tenable solution to move on from Brad Arthur from.
Yeah, it's... Clint, have you got anything you want to add about that list of potential candidates?
Only to echo 40 sentiments there. If you're not replacing him with someone better, then why make the call, and why make the call now? And I'm in complete agreement there with 40. If it's not Wayne Bennett, then who and why? To me, it's Wayne or bust. And if the media that we've been led to read and believe leading into us doing this instant reaction is true, well, we've missed the boat on him. Again, I revert back to my previous comment. Unless there's some type of 4D chess being played out in the media, and they're all just taking us for a ride because they can, and they end up making it happen. I don't think that's going to be the case. But stranger things have happened in rugby league, as we know.
And my follow-up now is that if it's not Wayne Bennett, who I think would be a big selling point to the current roster, and again, not to say that the current roster doesn't need a lot of work, but in terms of the core players that we would want to keep, much has been made in recent weeks about the player options at the Parramatta Eels. Mm-hmm. And, Brad was being a player's coach and being very close to a number of key players. Do we need to now start worrying about the Mitchell Moseses, the Dylan Browns in this roster with Brad gone? I don't know. They've got player options, though.
I truly believe, John, that it would be naivety to think that there isn't work that will be needed in that regard. Complete naivety. And I think there is a need to overhaul the roster, without question. We also know that there are deeper issues within the club about how you get certain contracts done. We're too slow with doing things. Look, there's a whole lot of things I would talk about, but this is not the right place to be doing that. It's probably an area that I don't want to delve into, in fact, right now. But yeah, as I said, I think it'd be naive to think that there wouldn't be things that need to be discussed with regard to players within the roster, and even players coming through in the roster, because there are I guess there are loyal players that are there. Ultimately, a player's going to look after himself. We know that. They're not going to bite off their nose to spite their face. They're not going to throw away a contract because they enjoy being coached by a particular coach. However, as I said, you're going to be naive to think that there isn't some work that needs to be done.
Yeah, it's a pretty somber place to be at, but that's the reality, is that even if it is Wayne Bennett coming in, there's plenty of work to be done with his roster, plenty of work to be done with the juniors and our pathways to first grade. So that's the best case scenario. And as it stands, we're not looking at a best case scenario. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out, how the Parramatta Eels do salvage the situation if Wayne turns them down, and where they go to. So it's going to be...
Well, I think one of the interesting things is going to be answered immediately tomorrow on Team List Tuesday, because I think the hand had been forced now with team changes. I was expecting team changes this week. It'll be interesting to see with that responsibility whether Trent Barrett goes ahead with some of the changes that we're expecting, or whether he's got his own ideas about what shape the team needs to be going forward, because there are limited options for what's there. So
and
I wonder
I suppose
if there'll be a left field selection.
That also moves us to a very interesting conversation about the rest of season 2024, where now there is no excuse for not prioritising junior development, or not junior, but younger player development in the NRL level. If there is a struggling senior player, then they can go spend some time in reserve grade, and they don't get the benefit of the doubt. And we look at, well, we can't really look at the Matt Arthurs of the roster anymore because that's going to be a different conversation and probably not one that ends up well for Parramatta. But there are the Charlie Geimers out there, the Brock Parkers and whatnot, and maybe they get a bit of a run or more of a run they would have got otherwise now, since seeing if they've got something for season 2025 is absolutely a priority.
Yeah, it's... Oh, mate, I mean, to be honest, mate, this is not a podcast that I expected to be making during the season proper. I had concerns that maybe it was going to be a podcast that we would be making at the end of the year, depending on how the rest of the season panned out. But, look, it's... You can probably tell from all of that, listeners can probably tell listening to all of us that we are shocked at what's transpired today. We are really, really shocked. I guess we were already reeling from the performance that we had to watch yesterday with the first grade team, and maybe it's a case of the players ended up sealing Brad's fate yesterday. But actually, no, I can't. I have to take that back, because the Eels have just admitted they've been in negotiations with Bennett since the 1st of May. So,
which was the tough loss to Manly where we were in front at half time.
Yes.
And ran out of juice. Yeah. So look, it's like I said, very interesting times for the club. I was probably a little bit more skeptical of Brad's future than you, Sixties, and I probably intimated that a bit in the podcast, talking about, lines being drawn and sort of preparations he made to maybe make the coach more accountable than other parties, which sure reads that way now at least. But by the same token, I am very sad the way it ended for Brad, and I think that with, like I said earlier in the podcast, with minor moves elsewhere, just grains of sand and marbles going different ways, we could have won a premiership with Brad, and I don't doubt that he will be very successful elsewhere. But I will also afford whoever is the new coach, and hopefully they make a good appointment, but I'll afford whoever it is plenty of reason to be optimistic and believe in. So that's just the nature of being a fan. We're sort of married in this very abusive relationship to a club that like to torment us at times, it feels like. But, whoever is the new head coach, and also Trent Barrett while he is the interim head coach, will obviously, back them to the hilt, because that's the nature of being a fan.
But let's not skirt around the topic. Nothing's going to change with whoever's the coach unless there are other significant changes that happen with the club.
That's fair. That's fair.
Nothing is going to change without significant roster change. Nothing is going to change without changes to our recruitment and retention processes.
Yeah, I don't think that's outrageous.
And the other area I'm not getting into publicly, mate, but what the main issue is within the Eels club.
I think, well, that one's been in the headlines. So
it's in the media.
We're not going to
dive into it here.
We're not sitting on a secret here, being cryptic to everyone. No. This is very much something that's being played out in the media. And if you read between the lines,
we're not going to talk about that here now. But the Eels are well aware of it. It's a matter of whether anything happens.
Yeah. Do they act on it?
Yeah. Absolutely. So, and it's not saying anything that I haven't said to the club either. And that. So it's, unless there are things that change at the club, and I'm not saying anything out of school here either. Unless there are things that change at the club, changing a coach isn't going to change what's happening and what's been happening. Now, if they feel that a change of coach will help with any other changes that they're going to make, well and good. But I could then throw back, why have we held back on other changes? I just hope that this is going forward in a whole lot of respects. That's all I'm going to say. I hope this is going to be moving forward in many, many respects. And I'm not calling for the heads of individuals. Let me point that out. I'm not saying people need to be sacked. I'm talking about processes have to change. I'm talking about something else has to change. I'm not talking about calling for the heads of any individuals. There are things that are done the way that we do things. I think it has to change.
I don't disagree. I mean, you look at it from the junior perspective, and moving on from Brad Arthur doesn't change the fact that we lost players like Lachlan Metcalf, in the current junior rep season. So there's things from top to bottom that need to be not even polished, but maybe wholesalely changed in order to make us a better football club. And moving on from the head coach is not the only move in that regard. So going to be an important period for the club moving forwards, whether it's Wayne Bennett or someone else at the helm. We've got a lot of player options to now negotiate through. And in some ways, maybe that's not a bad thing if we're talking about a clean out of the roster. But at the same time, you're looking at that player market, and it's not exactly rich with guys to build a roster with. So whoever comes in, they're going to have their hands full for a pretty serious job.
Yeah. Clint, anything you want to add in there?
Look, changing coach isn't a silver bullet. It's just one of many levers that we can pull. And if we think that this is the only lever that's going to elevate us, and as the club statement suggested, address the staleness of our current playing style / the results we're currently getting in the NRL team, then that makes today's decision an ill-thought one, because it can't be the only thing that happens in isolation. Because the fact of the matter is, any predicament, positive or negative, that a sporting club, a sporting organisation gets itself into is always the sum of its parts. It's never exclusively one thing. Now, it can be heavily contributed by one thing, but it's never exclusively one thing. So, you've got to hope that the people that are at the helm and in charge of making these decisions have a plan going forward, because we are at a classic fork in the road situation here right now. And if the right decisions aren't made, and by right decisions, I mean effective decisions aren't made, then we risk finding ourselves in the predicament that we began in prior to Brad Arthur's tenure.
Well, as I've said before, what we have to trust is that the people who are charged with making decisions about our club know more than what we do.
Mm-hmm.
And that's probably now where our faith has to lie, that the people who have that responsibility know more than we do. So that's, and I think that's important going forward. We will see what sort of decisions are made going forward, and I imagine we would see that in the near future. But yeah, it's I'm still a little bit lost for words from today. John, have you got some way that you want to wrap things up?
Yeah, not much more to add there, big fella. Obviously, this is a dynamic situation, and I guess pretty much every podcast we record moving forwards now is sort of a subject to watch this space. What's the most recent development in Parramatta's chase of a new head coach and beyond? So we do have our
Can I just interrupt there, John? You mean you didn't record all of our last conversation?
No. That's strictly for the platinum members of the podcast there. So if you're supporting us, you'll get the secret outtakes there.
I think maybe we ought to have a special Patreon level podcast access
for the outtakes,
for the conversation that just took place. Then about some interesting opinions that were just expressed. So and and one of your little additions that you made, that you suggested you were going to make to the podcast there, just with a little recording that you dropped in. So, yeah, unfortunately, people, we're having a little bit of an in-joke there. But, yeah, sorry, John, for interrupting.
Yeah, but it's obviously a fluid situation now. We're going to have to wait and see in the next 24 hours what the Wayne Bennett final response is, whether he's going to commit to South Sydney like the most logical outcome is, whether he's going to entertain Parramatta's hypothetical offer, where do the Parramatta Eels go from there, which means that tomorrow's news podcast is obviously going to be very spicy with the, I assume, the fallout from that one way or the other. That will be without you, though, Sixties, because you're going to be busy tomorrow night, so it'll be myself and Clint helming that one. And
I'm off to the junior reps presentation night. Look, maybe what we should do, if we haven't already, I mean, we've really done it, but just on behalf of the Cumberland Throw, just to thank Brad for his service to the club for the last 11 years at the helm, not to mention his time there with Stephen Kearney and having to take over as the
interim head coach.
Yeah, so we greatly appreciate the time that that Brad's put in. Not just the time, I mean, just the results that he got, the way that he transformed and led the club during such a tumultuous period. Thanks, Brad, for everything that you've done. It's something that, as supporters, we've appreciated, and we wish Brad all the best. We're sure that he's going to get a gig in the NRL much sooner rather than later, and we know he'll have great success wherever he goes. It's as I said, it's he's the longest serving Parramatta Eels coach in the history of the club now, and I think that's a record that he's deserved to have. And yeah, I think we wish him well moving forward.
And yeah, and probably the way we wrap it up, boys, is obviously we're going to be very interested in where the Parramatta Eels go, but I think Brad's classiness in the situation, coming back to that quote that we started the podcast with, is probably a good way to finish it, you know, and just to reinforce the magnanimous route that he's taken on a day where the club probably showed him a lot less respect than he deserved given his 11 years here. But, you know, saying that he, you know, had you told me I would have coached 264 games for Parramatta, reach a grand final, watch my son debut, and then get sacked, I'd do it all again. I'd sign up for it all again tomorrow. Like, that's in a way, it's rugby league poetry, isn't it? And it's some fine wordsmithing from a bloke that gave blood, sweat, and tears for this club. So thank you to BA for 11, I will say, you know, largely incredible years. You know, from where he took this club to making us competitive against an actual modern-day dynasty is a huge testament to the efforts that he made. And like I said, if things are played out even remotely, marginally different, there's a very good chance he has a ring in his possession sometime between 2019 and 2022. So thank you, Brad. And yeah, stay tuned for the next podcast. There's going to be a lot to talk about. Yeah, and I hope you enjoyed our frank and honest reactions to a crossroads day for the club.
And as I always say, fellas, go you mighty Eels.